defending the free market, and making the moral case for capitalism. The Justin Moore Show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Justin Moore Show, where we make sense of what's going on in this crazy, insane, out of control world. And now, ladies and gentlemen, what we just found out after Thanksgiving, actually it was, obviously Thanksgiving is always on Thursday, and on Saturday, we found out that Fidel Castro died at 90 years old. And, of course, everybody listening here, you guys know, oh yeah, Fidel Castro, he's the dictator over in Cuba for over 50 years. I mean, the guy took power in 1959. And here's this guy, at the time of his death, he's worth over $1 billion. And you guys remember when I did that episode talking about Venezuela, and I pointed out, you know, look, when Hugo Chavez died, I can't remember what the figure was. I think he's worth over $6 billion, I want to say. Don't quote me. But I ask you guys, well, how does this happen? There's only a few countries in the entire world that are socialist, that are all out communist. You know, you got Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez died, Cuba, and then North Korea. And all these guys end up rich, but they're supposed to be men of the people, right? They're the ones who are always talking about, you know, income inequality, and and in these communist, you know, societies, it's all one giant family, and we got to look after one another and all this. Well, here's these guys getting rich off the backs of the general population, and these guys are starving. And actually, I came across here. This is a fascinating piece. It's a little over a year old though, but I think it's important for me to read this. I'm actually reading the vast majority of it because it's so well done, and it really gives you guys a sense of what life is like over in Cuba and what they deal with over there. And this is a piece that comes from The Guardian, and this is and it came out on April 24th of 2015. So I'm gonna start reading this thing, guys. Just listen up to what this thing, to what's going on over there, and you guys tell me: is this the type of, you know, all these people who brag about how great socialism would be, especially the young millennial generation? They love the idea of socialism. Well, after I go through this piece here, I mean, look, is this something that you should be so enthusiastic about? Obviously, listeners of this show, you guys know all the problems with socialism, but the average person out there, they don't get it. So anyway, here it is. As a percussionist with one of Havana's oldest and best-known bands, Orlando Ramos has toured the world, attended dozens of international festivals, and collaborated with a host of stars ranging from Billy Joel to Silvio Rodriguez. But while musicians from other countries might return from such trips with fine wines, aged whiskeys, or perhaps even exotic drugs, Ramos' first priority when packing his bags to go home is something far more fundamental: milk. Regular shortages of milk and other such basic goods underscore the many problems facing Cuba's centrally planned and U.S. embargoed economy. This makes a shopping trip an onerous and often disappointing task, even for those like Ramos who have a little spare cash. The hardest thing to find here is milk, says the 75-year-old who has played for more than 40 years with Manguera. Whenever I travel, my suitcases are full of powdered milk when I return. Millions of Cubans have faced similar or worse problems for decades, but President Raul Castro has moved in recent years to change the system with a series of modest market reforms. The recent rapprochement with the U.S., which was the island's main trading partner before the Cold War, is also a source of hope for fuller shop shelves. And actually, just reading that last part there, you know, from this socialist / I guess you could, if I want to be a little bit partisan here, Democrat sort of mindset. But really, it's part of the Republican Party too. But it's this idea that, hey, look, you know, we got a problem in society. Let's just step up. Let's just pass another law. Well, with what I just read here from what's going on in Cuba, you know, why doesn't Raul Castro, why don't they just pass forth a law saying that it's illegal for stores to have empty shelves? They must keep their shelves full. Because, you know, if you don't have the empty shelves, then you won't have starving people, right? Yeah, I mean, this is the mindset with these guys. It's the exact same sort of rationale, these people who support the minimum wage. Oh, well, we need a livable wage. So if we just raise the minimum wage, well, that makes, oh, look, you now have a livable wage. Yeah, it's that simple. You can just tweak the economy like that, and there are no unintended consequences with it whatsoever. No, see, that is the short-sighted mindset that the average person out there has. Because people, and I've made this case many times on my show, most people are economically illiterate. And that's certainly what's infecting Cuba. But anyway, let's just continue on with the piece. After the 1959 revolution, Cuba adopted a socialist food production and distribution system that ensured a survival level of heavily subsidized food for everyone. With extra rations for children and the elderly, it helps to account for the country's impressive levels of longevity and low infant mortality. Okay, I got to take issue with this little paragraph I just read. Now, I like what most of this piece has to say because it really is laying out kind of what the average person's going through over there. But just reading that, it sounds like the Guardian is saying, hey, look, thanks to all these food rations that the government generously gives to its citizens, especially for the children and the elderly, this is what's accounting for these impressive levels of longevity and low infant mortality over in Cuba. I mean, that is such a BS statement. And keep in mind, like places like Cuba, because, if they stress their longevity and, the low infant mortality, but it comes down to, well, how do you figure the statistics? What do you consider, when there has been a death at birth? That sort of thing. If you don't count certain deaths because your parameters are a lot different than here in the United States, well, then you can artificially have a very low infant mortality rate. Or with your impressive levels of longevity, there's certain things you can tweak and that you won't have it count against it. I mean, I'd have to look into exactly how they compute the statistics for that. But my guess is they're most likely not following the same criteria as we do in the United States when we go to calculate what the longevity rate is here and the infant mortality rate. So it's so easy to manipulate things like this. That's why the key thing with statistics in general, it's all about context. If you understand the context of where the numbers are coming from, well, then you can actually compare apples to apples. But here, comparing those numbers in Cuba to the United States, that's comparing apples to oranges. But of course, leftists, they want to take advantage of every opportunity they can. And if the average person you're arguing with, if some leftist brings up, oh, well, Cuba, I mean, look, socialism works. They have these impressive levels of longevity and a low infant mortality rate. They have this great healthcare system, and it's all paid for by the government. Because they're counting on you not really knowing and digging into the numbers and saying, oh, hey, actually, if you were to compute this in Cuba, that the way that they do here in the United States, actually they have much higher infant mortality over there, and their longevity wouldn't be quite as impressive. That's one way that the socialists like to pull the wool over the eyes of people. But anyway, let's continue on with this piece. The system continues today. Every Cuban family registers with a local supply store where they can use a librete or ration book. Forgive me, my Spanish is a little rusty because I know Libra is book. But anyway, continuing on here. This typically provides about 22 pounds of rice, 6 kilograms of white sugar, 2 kilograms of brown sugar, 250 milliliters or 1 cup of cooking oil, 5 eggs, and a packet of coffee per person per month, along with 2 kilograms of meat, usually chicken, every 10 days, a bun every day, and a bag of salt every 3 months. Milk is provided for pregnant women and children under 7 years of age. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I just read to you right here, this is the ration that each person gets in Cuba, and it's for an entire month. I mean, that's nothing in terms of food. And like when I go to Costco, I mean, if one of these Cuban people went and followed me when I went to, Costco, they might start blushing and be like, oh, geez, Justin, wait, how many are in your family? Oh, yeah, it's just me. I mean, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves because when I go to Costco, I load up getting family sizes of everything. And I'm just feeding myself, So, luckily in the United States, I have that luxury. I can choose to spend my money how I want. And as long as you can get through all the food that you buy, say at a huge warehouse store like a Costco or a Sam's Club, you actually save a lot of money that way. But here, these people in Cuba, They don't have that choice. The government's telling them, hey, this is what you get per month. And so if you actually want to survive, you have to buy more than what the ration is. So let me just continue on and they'll explain that. The basic Librita products are guaranteed, but they are not enough. So people often have to travel to several places on several different days to make up the shortfall. Where to find eggs is a common subject of discussion. The rations are enough for rice and sugar, but for other products, they only last 5 or 6 days. So you have to buy extra. You have to spend a lot of time before you can get everything you need, said one of the more affluent families in the Natiko district of the city. We hire a messenger to do the shopping for us. So here we have, if you want to get, so you can actually survive, here's some of the more affluent families. They hire messengers to go gather their food for them because, it takes way too much of your precious time going and traveling around just gathering supplies. And what I just read there, the government supplies that you get, the ration food, that lasts about 6 days. And it's supposed to last a month? Ladies and gentlemen, this is socialism. This is what this gets you. It's equal misery. And continuing on. For decades, many items have effectively been off limits to those who could only pay in pesos. At a farmer's market near Miramar, the sign outside a butcher's stall offers only 3 cuts of pork. Asked for beef, the butcher scoffs. I've forgotten what it tastes like, he jokes. I haven't had it since I was a child. To buy scarcer items, Cubans used to need the currency used by tourists, the CUC, or a convertible unit of currency, which can be used at dollar stores, which offer a far wider variety of goods. Partly for this reason, many skilled engineers and doctors found part-time jobs as taxi drivers or hotel staff to add a CUC income to their meager peso salaries. So here we have over in Cuba, what we consider to be well-to-do professions here in the United States. If you're doctors and engineers, but over in Cuba, look, these doctors and engineers are purposely becoming taxi drivers because if you can get some tourists with some foreign currencies, that's worth a lot more than your pesos are. And so you can actually end up buying stuff that you need that way. And this is what life is like over in Cuba, ladies and gentlemen. And continuing on here, a fairly large dollar store in the suburbs of Havana are priced in both pesos and CUCs as a step towards the currency integration promised by the government. But they remain expensive relative to incomes. A kilo of milk powder costs almost a third of the monthly salary of 500 pesos, about $21. A steak dinner can cost a family half this income. Even at these prices, the shop has run out of butter, ketchup, and short pasta. The black market partially fills the vacuum. On roadsides further out of town, unauthorized hawkers tote bags of sausages, crackers, potatoes, and other products that are scarce or only supposed to be available through the state system. With money, it is possible to eat well in Havana. One result of reform has been an explosion of private restaurants, known as paladres, which have given those who can afford it a choice of Italian, Spanish, and French cuisine, including lobster, steak, shrimp, and even crocodile meat. But for most people, the basics are often hard to come by. The 1960 U.S. embargo is part of the problem, as was the 1991 fall of the Soviet Union. But Cuba's inefficient farming system is also to blame. Although agriculture is supposed to be at the forefront of reforms, the changes have been patchy, and the results so far unimpressive. Okay, now this is another part of the Guardian piece where I think they kind of go off the beaten path and where I disagree with them. Because they're kind of pointing out, well, hey, look, yeah, we're pointing out in this article, Cuba's got a lot of problems, it's a lot of misery. No, this is not the fault of socialism. They're kind of leaning at here, but they're saying, well, it's because of the U.S. embargo, because the Cubans aren't allowed to buy, goods from the United States, so that's why they're so impoverished. Now, of course, free trade is beneficial. Obviously, I agree with that. But what I've been reading here, all these economic problems that Cuba's facing, this is the result of government intervention in the economy. This is what happens when government runs the show. There is no prosperity. It is misery. And that is what the Cuban people face. And because here's the key thing. Like say if you're going to trade with somebody, and I made this point, I think it was just the last week's episode, I think, that if you want to consume a good, you first must produce something, because if you want to trade, you got to have something to trade, right? Well, so, I mean, if Cuba, they want to trade with other nations like the United States, well, they got to have something to trade. Okay, yeah, they do have some goods, but because the government runs the vast majority of the businesses over there, and longtime listeners of this show know, I stress and make the point that government is always going to be a lot more inefficient at running anything compared to the private sector. Because first and foremost, the government, they don't have a profit motive. They have no incentive to be efficient. And then, there's no competition with government. You're getting taxpayer money regardless of the quality of your service or the quality of your products. So there's no incentive to improve. And so in Cuba, with the government running the vast majority of businesses, if you're really inefficient at producing, well, now that's less goods that you can trade with, say, the United States. So there's going to be, in general, it's going to be more poverty, even if you could trade with the United States, which Obama is trying to open up relations with Cuba, and he started that last year. And it sounds like Trump doesn't want to do that. He actually wants to go back to where it was before, completely block Cuba off, which I completely disagree with. I think we should open up and we should trade with Cuba. That is a good way if we want to, introduce the Cuban people to a little bit more capitalism. Now, in the United States, we're moving more and more away from capitalism, but that's a way to, slowly get them off the communist path, I guess. And of course, it's not going to happen immediately. Like, okay, now they're capitalists. No, it's a long process, but it definitely, they'll be a lot better off than they are now. That's for sure. Look at China. That's a good example of a country who was very communist, and now they've really opened up their markets and they're becoming a lot more capitalist. So now let's just continue on with the piece here. I'm almost done with it. I've been a farmer all my life, and this is the hardest it has ever been, said Mendez, whose name has been changed. We want to sell up and move. Her son, who has a bigger cattle ranch, is doing better, but his herd has suffered from the pressures of excess demand. A few months ago, he woke to find one of his cows had been butchered in its shed. The rustlers had used the cover of a rainstorm to sneak in, inject the animal with a tranquilizer, and then remove its legs, rump, and other prime cuts. It was a high-risk crime. Cuba's criminal code has also been distorted by economic controls. The maximum penalty for illegally slaughtering a cow and selling the meat is 18 years in prison. You can get a lighter sentence for killing a person, exclaims Noriel Mendez, the nephew of the farmers. And the stiff punishment is not just for steak thieves. Last month, a dozen people were sentenced between 5 and 15 years for conspiring to divert millions of eggs, another scarce commodity, to the black market. Gosh. When you read things like that, all the complaining I do about what's going on here in the United States and how bad it's going to be. And look, this is what the Cuban people are going through now. You can get 18 years in prison for illegally slaughtering a cow and selling its meat. People were conspiring, diverting millions of eggs. This is stuff we laugh out here, but that's a serious crime over there. This is the road that America's heading down, where if we want to have more economic controls, the government is the answer. More government intervention begets more government intervention. That is what has happened to the Cuban people. That's what's happened over in Venezuela. In the United States, we've been consumed by that for decades now. This progressive movement for over 100 years. This is how we've gotten to the point where we are at today. And the way it's looking with a guy like Trump, who's going to be the next president of the United States, does he seem serious about drastically shrinking the size of government? Realizing that, hey, government isn't the answer? No. Absolutely not. That is not what I've seen from Trump whatsoever. And so, unfortunately, I hope we don't get to the Cuban level of, socialism. That would not be good. But who knows? And then I just want to jump to this other piece here. I just have one paragraph I want to read from it. And this is coming from insidersources.com. And it's actually written by Benjamin Powell, who was a former staffer or chief of staff for Ron Paul, I believe. And this is what he has to say. There is no doubt that Castro has the blood of innocent people on his hands. The Cuba Archive project, which requires stringent documentation, has verified the deaths of 5,600 people before firing squads and an additional 1,200 extrajudicial assassinations. Historian R.J. Rumel estimates a much larger 35,000 to 141,000 Cubans have died at the hands of Castro's government. Okay, so getting back to Castro now. So here I've been laying out in this episode so far that look at all the economic consequences from when you embrace socialism. How people can't afford to feed themselves. They have to get on the black market just to try to survive, try to get their hands on foreign currencies. So these doctors and engineers become taxi drivers by night so they can afford to feed their family. That's the economic consequences of socialism. And then we get to, and what always happens in these socialist governments as well, is these dictators, they kill a lot of their citizens because, they got to maintain that control and the legitimacy. And here, 141,000 Cubans have died at the hands of Castro's government, over his 50 years of power. What's so compassionate about socialism when you look at the economic consequences, all the deaths? It's amazing how why can't libertarians in general, why can't we be more effective combating against socialism when it's so obvious that the us free market types and those of us who embrace capitalism, we have the moral high ground. Socialist, how can we ever let them get the moral high ground when we look at evidence like this? Just looking at Fidel Castro. I guess it just comes down to you have to understand, what the real history is. So then you can tell these little socialist guys, because they most likely have no idea about any of this stuff. So just being willing to educate people and not trying to show that, hey, I'm smarter than you, but just, come across as, hey, I'm just informing you, letting you know, and just being very respectful to someone, we can pull them over, because when we open their eyes to the reality of what's really gone on in these socialist governments, I think we can win a lot of them over. But anyway, here, I actually now want to pull over just another quote, another couple sentences here, but this is from a different piece. This is coming from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and this is just from December 1st. And I found this to be kind of funny, to say the least, I guess, just because, with all the economic problems over in Cuba, I guess there is one good thing about it, in that they don't really have a drug problem. And we just read what they have to say here. This is by Michael McDowell. In a break from the 1940s and 1950s, there seems to be few, if any, drug problems in Cuba. This is good news. However, there are no drug problems because there's no money. The salary that all Cubans receive from the government is the equivalent of $60 to $80 a month, whether they be a physician or a bus driver. So, can you imagine here in the United States, could you live off of $60 to $80 a month? That's nothing. For most of you out there, that's like your cell phone bill, right? And now, just to put all this into perspective, what I've been talking about, it's like, okay, Justin, yeah, okay, it sounds like Cuba, yeah, it sucks. You have to buy stuff on the black market. The government rations your foods. You don't really have the freedom to buy what you want. Okay, their store shelves are empty, yada, yada, yada. But how about, okay, now what I'm going to read to you guys, this is going to put it all into context. And when we look at Fidel, since he was dictator of Cuba since 1959, we need to look at, okay, how much prosperity was there during his 50 years in power? Did he actually, maybe if we look back, maybe he improved the people's lives? Well, this piece from Forbes by Tim Worstall, he points out that is not the case at all. Okay, guys, listen closely and get this. And in 1959, when Castro took power, GDP per capita for Cuba was some $2,067 a year, about two-thirds of Latin America in general, and about the same as Ecuador. $1,975. Jamaica is at $2,541. Panama is at $2,322 a year, and two-thirds of Puerto Rico is at $3,239. Despite that playground of rich Americans thing, it was, by the standards of the time, doing reasonably well. By 1999, 40 years later, Cuba had advanced hardly at all to $2,307, while Ecuador had relatively jumped to 38.09, Jamaica to 36.70, Panama to 56.18, and Puerto Rico to $13,738. GDP isn't everything, of course, but it's still hugely important, for it's the basic measure of what is possible that people on average can consume. And we don't tend to think that Ecuador, Jamaica, Panama, and Puerto Rico were particularly well run in the later decades of the 20th century. But at least they didn't have a government actively conspiring to keep them impoverished like Cuba did. Okay, so look what I just pointed out here. So back in 1959 when Castro took power, the GDP per capita in Cuba was about $2,067 a year. And we fast forward to 1999, 40 years later, and Cuba went from, Cuba went from what was it, $2,067 to $2,307. So they bumped up just over $200, right? And we go look at, say, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico in 1959 was at $3,200 a year, okay? And then by 1999, it was up at almost $14,000. So Cuba basically stayed stagnant while all these other countries who are not very rich, and Puerto Rico right now has its own problems, but they're a lot more wealthy than Cuba is. And this, here again is more examples of what big government does. Big government brings poverty. It brings equal misery to all. And it seems like it's not going to be getting any better. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, now that Fidel's dead, maybe that will help Cuba out. No, as long as the government, as long as they continue to be communist and embrace socialism, they're not going to get any better. And you guys have heard the stories about when people go there, it feels like you've got time warped into the 1950s with all their old cars, right? It kind of reminds you of, Back to the Future. Marty, we're in an alternative 1985. Okay, sorry that my impression of Doc is not the best, but you guys get what I'm saying here, where it looks like Cuba is in an alternative universe, an alternative reality, where, they have all these old cars because, they can't afford to get new ones. They just got to do what they've had for decades and decades, which, if they've had cars since the 1950s, let's see, Fidel took power in 1959. No coincidence there. No, not at all. But all the things I've laid out in this episode here, just showing how horrible life is in communist Cuba. But here we have today. We had this campaign season, Bernie Sanders. Look at the huge political waves he made. And he almost beat Hillary Clinton in the primary. I guess it was probably kind of rigged from the get-go, but still, look at the enthusiasm he created. There's a lot of people I knew that, millennials my age, they were enthusiastic Bernie Sanders supporters. And then with, basically 50% of millennials out there, they view socialism in a positive light. All this information we have on our side, lovers of liberty, we have our work cut out for us, but we can win these guys over. We really can. It's just a matter. We first must arm ourselves with the necessary knowledge so that we can effectively communicate it to, the socialist-leaning types out there, because they really don't. They don't know any better. Anyone who's gone to college, you're indoctrinated with socialism, and that socialism is good, and you need the government to do all these sort of things, and that capitalism is evil. Without the government, there'd be these monopolies, and businesses would run and control everything. You need government to keep people in check, and government is viewed as this unbiased third party that's this overseer like a god, which coincidentally a lot of these socialist types are also atheists. Interesting. And that's what I try to do on my show here, guys. If this is your first chance of you listening to my show, go back listen to my old episodes. I try to make the case in all different aspects of the market economy, pointing out one thing after another, how the government, it looks like they're trying to make things better, but they end up making things worse with their regulations. Like look at Obamacare. It's supposed to make it affordable, and it's made, the Obamacare, which is called the Affordable Care Act, which has really made it healthcare unaffordable. My premiums just got jacked up this year. It's crazy. And look at over in Cuba. Okay, you can brag about all you want, all this. Oh, look at, they have free healthcare, free education. Oh, okay. Is that all that really free when you're making $80 a month? and you can't feed yourself? Oh yeah, you get your little government rations and your rations are just like everybody else. Is that really the type of life you want to live? The answer there is obvious. No. If you want prosperity, we must embrace capitalism. Capitalism is the answer. Capitalism is what helps the poor. But yeah, sure. Go. These little socialists, how about they just go live over in Cuba? And let's see what they think about that. And so with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I have for you guys today. I thank you so much for being here. And if you guys can, just really quickly here, I won't say very much. Jump to my website here. Go to justinmoreshow.com. MOHR is how you spell my last name. And you can make your Amazon goods, purchase them right through my little link there. I get a small commission back if you're trying to buy, any, presents for your siblings or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you have, a husband, wife. Just do them through my link right there, and I get a small commission back. It costs you nothing extra. And actually, there has been a few good deals on Amazon. And I just thank you guys for being here. And I'll talk with all you guys next week, and I'm looking forward to it. This is Justin Moore, signing off.